Okay, good morning. Ayin Beis, volume 3. We finished the bottom of, we're on page 1237. We began the paragraph, of course. Yeah. The Zeitz Chaim and the Zoyhas. Okay. So to sum up what we learned yesterday, the Rebbe Rashab enters now into the zone of the Yichud of Abba ve'Ima in the paragraph on page 1236, that in addition to the Chachma experience of being absorbed in a higher reality, which is higher than Bina, he spoke about another Yichud that's necessary in order to draw that into the emotions, into Zah, and that is that it should be a Zivuk Shalom, a complete union. There's a Zivuk She'ena Shalom and a Zivuk Shalom, which, in other words, a Yichud Chitzeni of Abba ve'Ima, of Chachma and Bina, and a Yichud Pnimi. The Yichud Pnimi is a complete Zivuk, and when that's the case, then it actually draws down new levels of energy that were not there before. And that's what Chachma, that's the essential inner unification on the level of Chachma that reaches all the way up into Arich, Atik, and Atzmus Ein Sof, which means the Pnimius of the Eir Ein Sof that's higher than as it relates to existence. He said, Chachma, the Pnimius Chachma, that's even higher than being called a source for existence. So Bina, or the lower level of Chachma, relates still somewhat to existence, and therefore it's not the complete elevation that we're looking for, connecting to Elikus, to the divine, in the purest way, where we divest ourselves of our emotional subjectivity and structures. Now, obviously, you can't reach there until you go through the lower levels, but to get to that level, you need to go to this. You need to go through all these stages, and then you come to a point where you can actually reach levels of the divine that are beyond existence. Now, this is very much connected to the interface that has been the central theme of so many of the hundreds of pages that we've been learning in this volume and the previous volume in Ayin Beis, and that is that we can reach levels that are pre-tzimtzum, and not just pre-tzimtzum as the Eir that relates to existence, where God is envisioning and allocating resources to create, but you can also reach places that are beyond existence, the Eir Ein Sof that before that God even desired existence. And we see that here in this level of Pnimius Chachma, what he calls Zivuk Shalom, a complete union. Now on page 1237, okay, so that covers that. On page 1237, Rebbe Rashab went further into this, and this is based on, as he clearly cites, on Biuri Azeir and Parshas Hazinu, citing three sources, Eitz Chaim Shara Zivugim, that this complete Zivug, this complete union, is when Chochma and Bina, Abba ve'Ima, gaze at what he calls the forehead of Arich Hampin, Netzach of Arich Hampin. We haven't yet discussed what is that in Aveda, what is that in the language of Chassidus Chabad. It's right now just a cryptic statement, the Metzach, the forehead of Arich Hampin, and from there it receives the 370 lights. And then he quotes from Idra Zuta in Zohar that the mitzvah, this Galab Atika Kedushin is called Ratzon. The forehead in Atika Kadisha, which is higher than Arich, is called Ratzon, because it's Reishe Elah, the Lo Yisyada. It's completely concealed and not known. And then he says the expression Pashit Chad Turna B'Simiyah. Well, in the Biri Azeir, he explains actually what that means, but we'll talk about it soon when we go into the full explanation. It's a very high level that's not even known, called Yesod Atik, where you have the Chesed of Radlah, is all encompassed in this forehead of Atik. And in this time of Raiva Deraivan, which means the highest level on Shabbos itself. If you remember in the previous page, he said, Agdola Zuhi b'Shabbos. The maturity of Moichin da Abba is on Shabbos. In Shabbos itself, if you recall in volume 2, he said there were 3 levels in Shabbos. And the highest level, Raiva Deraivan, the Tainug, that's the highest level, the pleasure, says during that time, Istakin b'mitzcha, high mitzcha ikr rotzen, b'kad rotzen, dois gala Raiva Deraivan, Istakin b'kula almen, u'misnarin amped dezov, v'chol din istamrin b'iskafin. Translated, that this radla, this level that's beyond, meaning it's not even aware, it's lo yusiyad, it's completely hidden, that is revealed in the forehead, or not revealed, it's encompassed in the forehead, and the Raiva, it repairs, and it adorns the forehead. That forehead is called Rotzen, and when that's revealed, it manifests in all the worlds, and it transcends, and it illuminates the face of Zohar Ampin, and all the severities and judgments are eliminated. And then he finally brought the Idra Rabbah, that brought the Mitzcha de Zah, Din Yisayir, in the forehead of Zah. So 3 levels of foreheads, Mitzcha. Basically 3 levels of Rotzen. Rotzen in Zah, Metzach in Zah, Metzach in Arachampin, Metzach in Atik Yemen. So the Metzach of Zah, the forehead of Zah, that's where din, severity, and judgment is stimulated, is awakened. And during the Eis Rotzen of Raiva Deraivan, Kulish Mishtachin Kameh. They all become annihilated or nullified before that higher revelation. Now, to explain what this is, and basically he's going to explain that we're talking about the levels of what happens that when you have the higher revelations from Atik and Arich, and they travel through Chachma, what happens to Zah, the place where the structure of existence that also includes severities and judgments. And he's going to say that it permeates and elevates that Zah. And he's going to explain it with the idea of this, since the word Ratzon is used again and again in these Zayas. So the next piece, which we began learning, and I'm going to sum up now, is that there are 2 levels of Ratzon. He says, Inyan hu, there are 2 types of Ratzon, benefesh. One he's calling a Ratzon Elyon that's super rational. L'mayla min atam. It doesn't have a reason. It's the way it is. That's what you want, higher than reason. Then there's a Ratzon, and this desire, is not taken, is not nilkach, is not derived from a person due to seichel or contemplation, is the etzem nefesh has this inclination and desire, and is drawn to it. The second type of ratzon is a ratzon that is derived in the person from seichel and tam. It means there's a contemplation and there's a reason and a seichel, a logic behind it, why he desires this thing. So the next piece we learned, and that's where we stopped, is the parentheses explaining what that desire is. So Al-Pi he said, is a desire that is connected to a feeling, like the feeling of love. Ava is from the word ava, which means ratzon. So when you're drawn to something, you love something, you're attracted to it, is the desire for that thing. But he said the truth is, the ikar ratzon is not synonymous with the emotional attraction and being drawn to something, is the pnimius of the midas and their vitality. And that's how Ratzon that guides and directs the midas. And here he explained it on all different angles. That, for example, if somebody has before them something that has pleasure, and naturally you would be drawn to it, if he removes his will from it, which means he does not want to have it, whatever reason, he won't enjoy it. He will not receive enjoyment because he chose not to want it. Like we see in Aveda, because God doesn't want us to indulge in material pleasures. So when a person removes their desire for it, because these pleasures will make a person coarse and fagrept and the opposite of refined. So therefore, which is against God's will and against the whole purpose, against the very purpose for which we were created. So therefore he has no pleasure in it. And you see, so the desire overrides the natural tendency. That's what the Ratzon does. And then he gave another example, like his bonus, when you contemplate on Re'eh, behold, God says, I have given before you the path of life and the path of the opposite. And a person chooses, and that causes a person to remove his desire from the path that's opposite of life. And he finds no pleasure in it, and on the contrary, he finds it despicable. And then he gives the example of the other extreme. If a person suffers, has pain and afflictions, and he chooses to accept it and want it, he will not feel the afflictions that much. And actually, it'll be a form of pleasure because he feels that through them, he's repairing and refining his soul. Like we see with the Tainus Cholam, the person who fasts on Shabbos, even though fasting is an affliction, fasting is something that the body wants to eat, but because his fasting is due because he wants a tikkun to repair and correct something, it's a taining, and that's why he's allowed to fast on Shabbos. And he called this, in Kabbalistic terms, teferes of ima, the mind, the teferes of the mind that wants, that manifests this ratzon, that recognizes this value in fasting, or whatever that ratzon, whatever that tam v'das that the ratzon is based on, that becomes the keser l'zah. It becomes the ratzon for midas. So essentially, the tam v'das, the ratzon al pi tam v'das, means that since there's a reason why you want, either you want some, you don't want to have the pleasures, or you do want to have the tsar, the yisurim, the afflictions, that becomes the ratzon that controls and governs the midas, the emotions, that you actually then are enjoying something that would naturally not be enjoyable, or you're not enjoying something that naturally would have been enjoyable. So that's keser l'zah. Okay, so we finished the parentheses. So what do we have so far? We know so far that there's two types of ratzon. He hasn't yet explained everything in detail, but he's now said there's two types of ratzon. The ratzon we're talking about now is a desire that has a seichel, a tam v'das behind it. Not a desire that's based on the very natural core essence of the soul. This is all coming to explain the zayas that we learned. So now we learn inside, we continue. V'hinei, this is like 2/3 of the way down, or a little less than a half of the way, a little more than a half of the way down, the line that begins covered. So he continues on page 1237. The pages can be found at ayinbeis.com. V'hinei haratzon hatachten hazeh. This lower desire, the one that's driven, nilkach b'adam, by tam v'das, by reason, by a logic, he says this lower ratzon, kashemer ba'ir ha'seichel, when that ir ha'seichel, the reason behind this ratzon, let's take the examples he gave. The reason that you want to be connected to godliness, and godliness doesn't want you to be indulging in physical things. So therefore that creates a ratzon, and that desire causes you not to want to have pleasure, not to have pleasure in things that naturally you'd have pleasure. So he says, when this ir ha'seichel is radiating in the ratzon, harihu b'chinas ratzon pnimi, it's a ratzon pnimi, meaning it's a very internalized desire. It's not just a desire that's external, it's very much driven by a very strong reason. And you're feeling that reasoning behind it. Like, in other words, you see before yourself, here's the path of life, here's the path of opposite of life. When you understand that well, and it's radiating in the desire, it's a ratzon pnimi, shechefetz u'mishtekek ba'adavar mipnei ha'seichel ha'mechayveh, that he desires and is mishtekek and lusts in this, that the intelligence, that the logic is compelling him to want. The yesh b'chayis v'gilei, and it has vitality and a revelation of energy in it. It's not by rote. It's not by rote at all. So when your reasons For example, that instead of doing something you naturally would want to do and enjoy, but now you have a reason that in order to really connect to the highest eternal life, you're going to now do mitzvahs. That ratzon is filled with energy, pnimi, desires and lust for that thing, because the seichel is driving him there. So the seichel is really fueling and empowering the ratzon, that it should be filled with vitality. But there's another way that the seichel affects the ratzon, which is much more mechanical. That's the kind. Aval yesh oid b'chinas ratzon. There's another level of ratzon, also ratzon al pitam v'das. He's not talking about the ratzon elyon. Hu asher gomer b'daite pam achas. That you contemplated on something, and gomer b'daite, you made a decision. Well, he doesn't say contemplated, so take out that word. Gomer b'daite means you came to a conclusion with your mind. One time, sheroi lirtzes dover ma, that it's worthy and fitting and appropriate to desire something. It could be the same thing we're talking about, something positive. And then afterwards, you forget the reason and the logic behind it. But you don't forget completely. What remains is the conclusion you came to. The only thing that remains is that determination, that conclusion, the heskem, that you agreed and committed, that commitment alone to do whatever that seichel led you to. But you forgot the reason. That's haskomas harotzen. The rotzen agreed, and shakach nigmer b'daite v'ritzeni pamachas. That so was concluded one time in his das, in his connection, in his mind and his desire. And now he doesn't know. He forgot what the reason was. The only thing that remains with him is that the commitment he made. That's how it was determined by him. So we have, in other words, two scenarios. One is when the seichel is radiating, you fully understand and appreciate, and then the seichel is filled with the vitality and the desire and the lust and the being drawn to it, filled with that energy. The other scenario is that you did have a reason, but in time that reason was forgotten. The only thing that remained, I made the commitment. I committed to it back then, so I'm going to stick to my commitment. So both are rotzen, both are influenced by seichel. But one, the seichel is active. The other one, the seichel is now receded into the memory, and receded and forgotten. But the conclusion, the commitment was there. Interesting. It's an interesting scenario. Okay. One second, let me finish and then I'll take some questions. One second. So now he says, and this is why I don't want to stop right here. He's now going to explain what the Zohar means, the cryptic Zohar. What is the metzach of Zohar? What does that mean? So he says, Hine zehu anikra b'chinas mitzcha de Zoh l'mayla. This level of rotzen al pitam, that is governing the emotions, that you are not going to give in to the natural emotions because you have good reason not to, or you're going to be drawn to have pleasure from something that you naturally would not have pleasure from. Fasting on Shabbos, for example, he says, when it's only a heskem etzlei, he just made the determination, he doesn't remember the reason, he calls that mitzcha de Zoh l'mayla. That means the forehead of Zoh above. Now, why is it called a forehead? So he says, why? V'u'al derech moshel. Why is it called a forehead? Because it's like, for example, ba'odam hatachten, example in the person, a human being below, shametzach master ala meichin. The forehead conceals and covers the meichin. You don't see meichin. All you see is a forehead. It's like an external shell. So the moichin is concealed, like he's saying here. The moichin has become concealed. You don't remember the reason. You only remember the result of the reason, which is the commitment you made. So what you see by a human being, hametzach master ala moichin shebereish, the forehead conceals, covers the mind within the head, within the skull, and it covers it up. So master means covers, maila means conceals. And it conceals them, the mind. So too, this is a mashal, so too is it in the heskim, in the determination or the commitment that remained after the contemplation. Now he does say contemplation. The seichel is not radiating any longer there because you don't know the reason. The seichel is receded in the background. What remains? Elaheskim poshut b'loy tam. It's just a simple commitment without reason at this point. And it covers and it conceals and covers the seichel that is within this rotzen that the commitment you make. And this is the level that's called metzach, forehead. Okay, we haven't finished, but I'm going to stop here. But I want to just show you what he did here. You see here a classic example how Chassidus Chabad takes a zohar that's completely cryptic, frankly. How are we supposed to understand the forehead of Atik, forehead of Arich, the forehead of Zah, which is what we're talking about? What does that mean even? We understand, as I said yesterday, it's not anthropomorphism. It's only a muscle. That God created a structure, the human structure, there's spiritual levels that are parallel, and we mirror that structure. So just like the human being has a forehead, has a head, has an eyes, nose, mouth, a brain, and just like we have a torso, we have a heart, all the organs, a right arm, a left arm. We say it every week in Pasuk Chaliyah, right? With the Yamina, the right arm, the left arm, and the entire body, all the way down to the legs. So we have Chachma bi Chabad Chagas Nihim, Guf, Reish Guf Regel, as we learned earlier, the three levels like in the Midas, in the growth of the Midas. So too, that reflects that Lamaila you have the structure. But what is Metzach exactly? What is Metzach in terms that we can relate to? So now he explained it. It's a rotzen, but it's a rotzen with a moichin that gave birth to this will and desire and commitment is concealed, like a metzar that conceals that which is behind the forehead, the brain, the mind. So is this heskim? That's the level of metzar of zah. We haven't yet finished the discussion. How does that relate to Atik and Arich and so on? But here's a heskim. So it's quite similar and reminiscent of, remember when we began this discussion, when he spoke about mutva, murgish, muskul, what did he say mutva was? The natural inclinations. He called that the way we wired, a heskim, that you make a determination that you're going to do Torah mitzvahs. This was all the way back on page 1221. I'm not saying he's referring to this level. It's just reminding me of it. And we have to see whether it's the same level. But he spoke about heskim, that a person determines. Now, why do you determine? There's a reason behind it. But the reason has been forgotten. Right now, the only thing that remains is rotzen without a tam. What is the level of rotzen with a tam that you do? He hasn't spelled out in Lamaila. So far he's explained it in order to understand what metzach of zah is. So before I continue, if anybody wants to ask anything, it's not finished. So it's not a finished subject. So if you're asking me where this is going, we're going to learn inside. But if you want to ask me something on what we've learned, I'm happy to clarify.
I just want to know if you get in the case where we don't know the tam, we still have the lust and that we had when we knew the tam. That's all I want.
He doesn't say you had the lust. No, didn't say that yet. It seems like you don't have it because it's really more mechanical. But let's see what he's going to say. He's not finished yet. He's going to talk about what happens with his heskim. how it manifests. Okay, so to continue on, Vaheskim, and this commitment. I mean, Heskim means usually we say Haskama, I agree. But Heskim also means a determination. I've determined, I've agreed, I've determined, I've committed, just to translate it accurately. So he says, Vaheskim, this determination or this commitment, Yesh Beitekev Godel Yeser, Maharatzen Shal Piasechel, Ki Be'emes Etzem Haratzen Shal Amayla Masechel. Okay, so now he's saying something which would be a little counterintuitive. This determination, this commitment, has in it greater intensity than the Ratzon that's al pi seichel, meaning the Ratzon where the seichel is actively active and felt, that's driving the Ratzon, which he called before, that it causes the Ratzon to be pnimi, shachefetz, and mishtekik, ba'adovim, pnei ha-seichel ha-mechayve, v'yesh bechayz v'giliyeh. He says this Ratzon that's coming inside Heskim, where you don't have the moichin radiating, the metzach, has an intensity that's greater than the Ratzon that comes up in seichel. And why? Because in essence, this Ratzon is really a Ratzon that's higher than seichel. I can tell you right now, I'm not clear what he means by this. We understood till now the Ratzon that's higher than seichel, the Ratzon Elyon that we spoke about, that's because the Etzem HaNefesh wants it. It's wired that way. The Etzem HaNefesh is inclined and is drawn to something. Here we're talking about a Ratzon that's coming al pi seichel. In that there are two levels. The seichel is radiating in a revealed way, or the seichel has receded and you don't remember it. But now he's saying that because you're doing it because you're determined to do it, commitment, there's something about it that's stronger than even when it's radiating the seichel. Because why are you committed to it? Mela, when the seichel is there, the reason you're committed because you see this is the path of life. So even though naturally you'd be inclined to do something that, let's say, is physical pleasure, you don't have any pleasure in that because you want the life. You see it before your eyes. Your mind is telling you. Or the opposite, that something that's painful, your mind is telling you, your Ratzon, and it influences your Ratzon, that you should enjoy fasting on when you are, it's a tikkun for your soul. But why do you want it once the seichel is gone? It would seem that the Ratzon should dissipate. I don't remember why. Why would I commit to it? So he's going to explain that commitment has a strength that the Ratzon al pi seichel doesn't have. V'zehu shemetzach. In other words, it has something that's super rational. Because since the mind is no longer, the reason is no longer, you're not aware of any reason, you just have a distant memory that you made this determination and commitment. So it has the etzma rosh shalman masechel v'zeu shemetzach v'netzach hein dover echad. And metzach and netzach means being triumphed. Netzach means that power of victory, the need to be victorious, to win. Determination is one thing with metzach. Now I don't know if he means it because the letters are the same, metzach, netzach, or he's saying it in concept. Because it's two different words. Metzach is the forehead, and netzach means victory or determination. He's saying, hey, Dover, Daf Kuf Lamed Vav Amid Beis. So he's quoting again the Idra Rabbah, another page. I want to look it up there because I want to see how he connects the two. So you see now that this level of metzach, of zah, on one hand, it's hiding and concealing the mind and the logic behind the scenes, behind the forehead, like we said. On the other hand, it has a connection with determination. And now he explains. The Ratzon that is coming due to seichel, due to a logical reason, yochel ishtanis, that can change. as the reason changes. Mashenken aheskim lo yushuna. Whereas when you make a determination and a commitment, that does not change. It's unwavering. So now it sounds paradoxical, because on one hand, it began with a logic, but now it's become something that you decided, I'm committed to this, even if I don't understand. So he's telling us that this commitment is coming from a place that's deeper, that's coming from what he called etzem hanefesh, etzem harotzu shalamayla masechel, rather. I know there could be questions, but let's see what he's going to say with this, and let's continue. For who inyan mashakosav gam netzach Yisrael lo yishaker v'lo yinachem. And that's what it says. Netzach Yisrael, the word netzach, the victory of Israel, netzach Yisrael, its eternal power, lo yishaker v'lo yinachem. It will never be subject to deception and to any form of consolation, which he means here will not change. It's not subject to change. Kiloi odamhu. Because the Netzach Yisrael, the level, is not subject to change. It's like saying by the Eibishter, you can't say that he'll regret something. Yenachem is regret in this case. Because lo odamhu, he's not like a human being that's subject to changes. The B'tzir Adam Shaykh Nechumim. In the structure, the tziyur, the structure, the shape of a person, there it's possible regrets, change your mood, you change your mind. But a level that's lo adam, meaning higher than the human, I don't want to say frailty, human mortality, human limitations, is in a state of lo yanachem. It's not subject to change. Like we learned earlier in the Maimer Tikua Aleph, he's referring back to volume 1. Let me just look it up. If I can see quickly what that is. Long time ago. Shin Sadi Gimel. Yeah. Correct. So human beings by nature, we're constantly subject to change. Our wills, our mind, our interests change, our midas change, our feelings change, our moods change. But this determination is drawing from a power of loy adam within the adam, a power that's higher, that's not subject to seichel. So now what he's saying is the second level, that is only a heskim determination, has in it something that's coming from a power that's unwavering and unchangeable. So metzach, one part of it, we said it conceals the mind inside. It's higher than the structure or the image or the shape of the human being. Ukenoida, how do we know that? Because the forehead, he's going to explain, is higher than the structure of the human being. As it's known, that the beginning of what we talk about, the shape that defines a human body, a human being, Humin, page 1238, Humin hachetem. It begins with the nose. We learned about this earlier. We learned about this earlier, that boitkin ada chetem. That God forbid, a person, let's say, is found under a collapsed building. I know it's quite airy in context of what happened recently. But there's a concept of a mapelis, which means a churva, means a building fell and a human being is found underneath. But you don't know who it is. And it's relevant to know, first of all, we need to know to identify, but also relevant, for example, to the dinim of aguna. When you want to identify that a husband died, so the wife knows that her husband is not alive, and she ultimately will have the ability to remarry. I know it sounds a little insensitive to think about it at that point, but Torah is also a legal document and it has to address that. So how do you identify a person? So in the Torah, you identify, it's only enough to go till his nose. You don't need to identify higher than the nose. So you can identify a person up till here. What we learn from that is that the Shiur Adam, the main visage and image of a person, begins with the nose and down. The forehead is in that context technically higher than the Shiur, the image that we identify a human being by. So now we have in Metzach something else. Before, the Metzach of Zah was referring to the concealed mind that's like beneath the forehead, that the forehead conceals. And that's why the reason is not there. It's only the determination that was left, the determination, the commitment. But now he's talking about a Mailan Metzach. The Mailan Metzach, that it touches a place that's higher than structure and therefore not subject to change. And that's why there's a determination and a commitment that's unwavering, even though you may not know the reason. So it gets a quality that even a seichel, a rotzen with a seichel doesn't have, because seichel can still shift. If the seichel shifts, the rotzen may shift. Valkeinu b'teikav gadol. That's why, coming from that level, the rotzen is b'teikav gadol. It's very intense and very powerful, very committed. So the intensity is there, the commitment is there, but the giluyim are not there. The gilui there is very concealed, because when you look at a metzach, you don't see the mind, you don't see the intelligence, so you don't have the vitality that comes with seichel. Seichel makes something come alive. You feel the reasoning behind it. It's driving you. It's empowering you. Here, it's just almost like not empty. A commitment that has nothing to do with vitality. You're just committed. It's like almost a stubborn commitment in a good way. It doesn't need to feel. It's like what Chassidus talks about, the Anshe Chayil, the simple foot soldiers, the simple people. They're just committed mitzad Kabbalah Seil. Like the soldier that does not a general, he doesn't understand all the strategies, doesn't know all the workings behind the scenes. It's like the simple person that tefillah la'ani, the pauper, the illiterate pauper who comes to see the king. He doesn't know about all these, all the intelligence and emotions and giluyim. He just sees the king. That's all he knows. Simple. So on one hand, it's unwavering because it's complete commitment. On the other hand, it doesn't have giluyim in it. There's no giluyim of intelligence and everything that vitalizes something.
This all is berotzein atachton, right? Not berotzein alien.
Well, right now it sounds like it's a combination of both. So let me just finish before I didn't finish before I'll take questions. 1 second. He's now going to go back to the Zohar and explain it. So right now it sounds to me that this second level, so he spoke about Rotzna Elyon, then he spoke about Rotzna Tachten, which is a Rotzna Pisechel. In that, he now discussed a Rotzna Pisechel, where the Sechel is forgotten. We don't know the reason, but the commitment remains, and that connects Metzach to Netzach, which is to an unwavering commitment. So it seems to me, it has something about the Rotzen that's L'mayla Mesech, because why would you have such a commitment? But he doesn't explicitly state it. He just says the words that this be'etzem ha'rotzen, that ki be'emes etzem ha'rotzen shel L'mayla Mesech. So it sounds like this Heskem has something from the Rotzen Elyon, but he didn't spell out Rotzen Elyon. He just said it's that this Rotzen Heskem yesh b'teikav gadol ki be'emes etzem ha'rotzen shel L'mayla Mesech. So it seems to me, but it's going to probably become more apparent, that this lower level of determination in some way connects with the Ratzon that's L'mayla Mesechel, the Ratzon Elyon. But again, he doesn't say explicitly, it just sounds like it, because it has this unwavering, this element that's L'mayla Loy Odom, L'nochem. But I would wait till we read the whole thing before come to that conclusion, because he hasn't tied it all together. But I will stop here just for questions, and then I'll read on. He's now going to explain the Zohar based on what we just discussed. Now that we know what Metzach is, Metzach of Zah, we're now going to soon discuss what is the Zohar trying to say with all the different references. Anybody want to ask anything?
I had this question that I asked you before I had opportunity to ask you. I continued to read. I saw that the next paragraph is saying that this is Rotzen Tachton, but in Rotzen Elyon there is also such a thing.
Okay, so well, you know what? We're going to come to it. It's fine. I don't want to say anything because I didn't read it yet. You did, so I don't want to say anything.
Does this mean also is this like a transformation from Ben to Evid?
Man, are you processing? I'm not even close to thinking about that. Where I'm learning this, as I always say, I'm absorbing what it says here. I'm not even using any other maimorim or other ideas at all. So I'm not even thinking like that. Maybe, maybe not. I don't even know what to say.
No, because you always said Ayin Beis and Islamic folk different. One's from Evid to Ben, and one from Ben to Evid.
I know, but right now I'm trying to understand. I'm basically barely holding on to trying to understand these 2 pages. Once we understand it, I can go back to that and try to put it in that context. I'm just not as fast as you, Doctor. So I am right now trying to simply understand the pshat. I think once we understand what he says here, we can then broaden it and connect it to other things. That's what I would advise we do. Okay. Remember, my training as a chayzer was that when the Rebbe spoke, I was focused only on one thing. What is he saying? Not on my understanding of it and not my connecting it to other things at all. And the more you understand what he's saying now, the better then you can go back then and start connecting. Just telling you my approach, how I've been trained. Okay. So now he brings it back to the Idra. He brought both from the Idra Zuta and the Idra Rabbah on the top of page 1237. And he's now going to explain what the Zohar means. Now, just for the record, as I keep looking at this piece on the Zohar is going to go for quite a while, at least till page 1241, which means another 3-4 pages. And if I recall correctly, even later. Yeah. So we'll get through it. Let's hear. So he says, "V'zeu she'amar be'idra sham," and this is what is written that he says in the Idra. What did he say there? The chol ma'ida the dinin misayidin b'hai mitzcha dezah. In the Idra Rabbi said that all the severities, the judgments, are awakened misayidin from the word Chassidus, like asarusa. They're awakened and stimulated b'hai mitzcha in that level called metzach of zah. Remember, we said on its own, it has its judgments because that's the structure of existence. Chesed, Gvura, judgment, and so on. Until you come to the Eis Rotzen, which is Shabbos, Arriva Deriven, when then all these severities and judgments melt away or are nullified or silenced. So he's explaining that now based on what we just learned. So we said all the dinim are mesaiden. Why? Since the determination, we said metzach of zah is what? Is a commitment. It doesn't have ha'oras ha'mechin because the mechin is concealed, like a forehead that conceals the mind beneath it, or like an avodah that he said that we don't remember the reason. All you remember is that I agreed, I made a commitment that I'm going to do Torah mitzvahs. I'm not feeling right now my reasoning. The reason for it is because the path of life, the blessing, the life. Or the reason because Hashem wants you to do it, and therefore stay away from pleasures of Elam Hazah. So you could be in a state where you actually feel and understand that the pleasures of this world bring you to a place that it's not a good place to be. So therefore you don't have any pleasure in it, and actually you're repulsed by it. Or you could say, I don't feel right now or understand why I shouldn't enjoy the pleasures of this world, but I made a commitment that I remember, and I'm committed to stick by it. So he says, so there's no ha'oras ha'mechin here. There's no mind. The mind is not at work here. You don't have an intelligent process. It's just a heskim. The only thing it has is not bekitzer, it's simsum. He's adding words. Before he said only the heskim. He says the only thing that remains is a kitzer, is like a summary. It's simsum. And a very concentrated, a very minimal diminishment. It's only a concealed trace alone that remains. In other words, there was a point where you understood it. And your mind told you this is what you should want, what you should not want. Now we've come to a point that only the heskim remains. In Zoh, you don't feel all that moichin. You feel it's only like the forehead. You only feel like he says now all these words. Like you feel it's like a distant memory. Doesn't say those words. But b'kitzer, b'tzimtzum, b'b'chinas l'shimen alemes bolvad. It's like a summary of whatever that understanding was, and it's in simsumdika form, meaning it's very diminished, very concealed. The only thing are shimen alemes bolvad, a concealed trace of what it is that you made that determination, that what it is that you understood, which now takes the shape only one thing, a commitment. I'm trying to find an example. I mean, I have examples not from Kedusha Dika places. It would be like somebody, I'm just throwing this out there. It's like, God forbid, a person made a commitment. I mean, there's even a story. There's a story about it. I'm trying to remember what it was. Two people dated and they determined they're going to get married. And they had all the good reasons for it. Then things happened, a war broke out, and time passed, and they both separated ways, and years passed, and then they meet again, but they don't remember the connection they had. They only remember that we made a commitment to each other, but they don't remember, either due to amnesia or other things. So you could have a situation where the connection was fully there, and you remember something happened, but the only thing that you actually consciously remember and hold on to is the commitment you made. I know I made a commitment, and I will stick to my commitment. You don't feel it, you don't understand it, but the commitment is there. I'm trying to remember, there is a story, I think Broughton Talks and Tales about this. I think with a weasel, 2 witnesses that were made. I don't remember now the details. I'll try to come up with it. But I think the point is clear. So therefore, since in Metzach of Zoh, you have a heskim that does not have revealed intelligence within it. It's only b'kitzer v'tzimtzum b'chinas shimen alamas bavad, only a concealed trace, not just a trace, a concealed trace. Al kain lo yochel lizbel es hahepech. So since it has minimal intelligence, it cannot tolerate the opposite. That's why there's din and gvura, like he's going to say. When a person's mind, he's going to explain in a moment, is expanded, you're able to tolerate different approaches. But when a person is in a very diminished state of cognitive awareness, and he's just doing determined like a child, he's going to explain a child easily goes into a tantrum. Going back to mutva murgish muskel. When the muscle is not shining and all you have is a heskim, so it's true you have a determination, but it's very easy for a person to be emotionally shaken up and moving from one state to the other. Moichin intelligence are compassionate. It's compassionate. When you don't have the mind at work, din v'gvura. You don't have that expandedness where you tolerate and able to contain many different approaches. You become very narrow-minded, basically. And everything, din and gvura, you're very judgmental. So that's why judgments reign in a place of metzach. He's talking now, of course, the downside of it. And that's why the Zohar says that the din misayered him. That's where they get awakened in Zoh. Zoh is emotions. The emotions now are not driven by a seichel that's revealed. So it's true, it's emotions are driven. It's only because I determine, but you're very fragile emotionally, because you don't have that expansive mind that can contain and understand different approaches. So din v'gvura reigns. U'kamay hatinuk, like a child, who mole dinin v'gvuras. He's filled with judgments and severities, or judge. What does that mean? Not that a child is judgmental, but a child can easily be critical and easily be negative and easily have a tantrum. V'zoken mole rachamim. And a person, an elder person, a sage type of person, is filled with compassion because his mind is expansive. He's mature. Basically, an immature person is very, what's the word? Irritable. That's the word I was looking for. Irritable. And therefore can be very judgmental. A mature person is compassionate. Same thing, the level of mitzcha, the forehead. Because the ha'aras ha'mechin are not there, not revealed. That's why the judgments awaken there, are stimulated from there. And when the metzach of arich ampin, which is a high level of metzach, not the metzach of zah, when that gets revealed, and when is that? During Radiates, the Eisratzen, b'mitzcha, meaning in the metzach of zah, ishtatik dina. The dinim, the judgments are silenced, are quieted. U'kamoishi is bayr, as we shall explain. So I'm going to stop here by this period. Top of page 1238. So now we understand what it means. Because now, once you understand that metzach is a rotzen, that's the heskem, the determination, the commitment. But the seichel has receded and is not revealed. That's why there's dinim. And arich ampin has the power to silence that because that's a revelation from a higher place, which he'll explain. We didn't explain yet. It will be explained. So we see here how this is unfolding as far as the whole maturity process of Chochmah and Bina and the Zivuk Shalom. Wow. Okay. Well, there's more to go because we are not finished. What exactly is Arich Ampin and what is Atik and how all that comes into play here? Okay. I exhale. Any questions?